Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking on what you might call the ultimate human job description. It's an idea that really tries to transcend culture and even religious labels.
Yes.
And our source material gives us a pretty clear mission here. It asks us to look past, all the centuries of political history, the baggage, and the tendency towards just pure ritualism, and instead to uncover this radical, ethical, and frankly philosophical blueprint for human existence that's laid out in the concept of Khalifa.
And that's such a crucial distinction to make right from the very beginning.
Right.
Because when most people hear that word Khalifa, especially, in a Western context, their minds immediately jump to the Caliphate.
The political institute.
The historical, political, often anarchical institution. But for this deep dive, we really have to intentionally decouple those two things. The original Quranic concept of Khalifa, which, translates roughly as vicegerency or stewardship, it's a philosophical deep well. It's about humanity's profound dignity, our purpose, and our radical responsibility here on Earth.
I really appreciate you starting with that emphasis on decoupling, because it sets the right tone, I think.
Yeah.
This is about a truly intellectual inquiry.
Yes.
We're talking about a universal mandate, a divine trust, a delegated authority that, it inherently comes with immense risk.
Yes, immense.
So the mission then is to understand that initial core, that intellectual and ethical blueprint. And it seems the source material frames this core as being in direct and often tragic conflict with how it later manifested politically.
Precisely. And that core paradox is where all the philosophical beauty is, really. Humanity is granted this profound delegated authority, this trust to establish justice, or adl, and maintain equilibrium, the mizan.
Okay.
But the very nature of that trust requires free will. And the very second, you grant a being free will.
You introduce the potential for corruption, for facade.
You introduce the potential for facade, exactly. So the real question, the one that sits under this entire mandate is, why was the potential for establishing conscious justice deemed worth the immense known risk of total destruction?
That speaks to a profound dignity in the human being, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's like you're not designed just to follow rules passively. You are. You're elevated. You're an active, conscious partner, and you're responsible for implementing these universal ethical principles.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this concept so eternally relevant to you, the listener, no matter what your background is. This isn't just history or some niche theology.
Yeah.
This is about the ultimate definition of human purpose. For us as individuals and for us as a collective, it places this profound, non-transferable accountability right on our shoulders. It demands we consciously, continuously participate in the moral ordering of the world.
Not just passive submission.
Not just passive submission, active, conscious partnership.
So to ground this whole discussion, let's look at the foundation. We have to define Khalifa clearly, because the sources are very insistent that it's fundamentally more than just, passive stewardship of the planet.
Oh, much more robust. The rationalist view in our sources insists that Khalifa implies a profound, delegated, legislative and executive authority.
That's a strong claim. Legislative and executive.
It is. It's the mandate to implement the entire divine system, the deen, and to actively maintain a just and balanced social order. It's like we are given the tools, a reason, and free will to translate these abstract divine principles into concrete, dynamic, social, and political reality.
And the foundational mandate for this. It's introduced in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 30. This is the moment, allegorically, that the Creator announces this intention to establish a successive authority, a Khalifa on earth.
Yes, and the announcement is made to the Malaikas.
Which our sources interpret here not as angels in the sort of traditional winged sense, but as the universal forces, the programmed cosmos.
Exactly. And this verse is so foundational because it immediately introduces the stakes, the moral tension. The Malaikas, which, represent systems that operate perfectly but without choice, things like gravity, orbital mechanics, our involuntary biological processes, they voice an immediate and very rational concern.
They ask the question.
Will you place upon it one who causes corruption, facade therein, and sheds blood, while we declare your praise and sanctify you?
That question is it's the first great rational critique of humanity, isn't it?
It is.
It's the universe itself acknowledging the central risk.
Yeah.
But let's really solidify the definition of facade here. The sources define it very specifically, not just as, general evil. It's systemic.
Yes, we have to approach facade rationally as a systemic failure. It is any outcome that results from violating the creator's established laws of balance, the mizan.
The Mizan.
Think of mizan as the fixed, necessary equilibrium for existence to continue, whether that's physical or ethical. So when humanity, through our conscious choice, violates the laws that uphold this equilibrium, the result is facade.
So we're not just talking about petty crime here. We are talking about profound violations that destabilize the entire system.
Exactly. I mean, the rational definition of facade would have to encompass environmental destruction because that violates the mizan of the ecosystem.
Sure.
It would include economic injustice because that violates the social mizan of equitable distribution. And of course, it includes social tyranny and warfare because that violates the ethical mizan of respect for human life and dignity. The Malaikas are essentially identifying the inevitable logical consequence of coupling profound authority with the unpredictable variable of free will.
The misuse of that authority could lead to a total violation of the established order.
A total violation.
It's a chilling prediction.
Yeah.
And one that, history seems to validate over and over again. But the creator's response in that verse is what pivots the whole conversation. Indeed, I know that which you do not know.
And that line signifies that the unique potential for good is seen as outweighing the known, calculated risk of destruction.
And this is where we feel the weight of choice.
We have to. The potential that the creator sees is this unique human ability to establish its justice, precisely because it's achieved through a conscious, ethical choice. The Malaikas, they follow the law by inherent necessity. Their obedience is involuntary.
Right.
Humanity's worship, our ibadah, when it aligns with the divine law, it's considered superior not because the action itself is different, but because it originates from a struggle, from a conscious moral choice. That capacity to freely choose alignment is what justifies our elevation to this role and, crucially, justifies the risk that comes with it.
So that profound choice elevates the status of humanity. It
Right.
makes us moral agents, not just programmed instruments.
Precisely.
So if we're reading these creation verses metaphorically, the goal is to establish this universal, timeless principle. Humanity is the creator's moral implementer.
Yeah.
And our accountability stems directly from that capacity to choose.
That is the core contractual lesson. A profound capacity for justice exists, but it is constantly, and I mean constantly, challenged by an equally profound potential for corruption. The guidance is sent precisely to help us fulfill the former and overcome the latter.
That emphasis on potential and choice brings us to the nature of human creation itself. I mean, the role of Khalifa seems to demand a dynamic developmental being, right? Not something static or pre-programmed.
It has to.
A trusteeship requires the ability to choose, to learn, and to adapt over time.
And the sources confirm this dynamic origin again and again. You see numerous verses like in chapter 22, verse 5, or chapter 32, but particularly chapter 71, verse 17, in Surah New. It really discusses this developmental reality.
What does it say?
Well, you have these recurring themes of creation from dust, turab, from clay, teen, from a sperm drop, nutfa, and then you get this key, often overlooked phrase in New 71.17.
Okay.
And Allah has caused you to grow from the earth a progressive growth.
Progressive growth. That phrase is critical, isn't it? In a rational interpretation, it strongly suggests a dynamic and unfolding, maybe an evolutionary process of development.
I think it has to. It confirms that humanity was meant to be a being in motion, not some kind of completed blueprint dropped onto the earth.
In this dynamic mode of creation, it validates the two non-negotiable prerequisites for the role of Khalifa.
Yes. First, you have free will. The being has to be capable of growth, of error, and therefore of making genuine moral choices. If we were created complete and static, like a perfectly carved statue,
Then the moral struggle would be meaningless.
the moral struggle, the capacity for repentance, tauba, the whole role of governance, it would all be meaningless.
And the second prerequisite, as a dynamic being, it would have to be knowledge or equal.
The ability to learn, to adapt, to execute divine law in a world that is constantly changing. Without that ability to accrue wisdom and adapt, well, the mission fails on day one.
So the synthesis of this dynamic origin, free will, and knowledge, that's essential.
It is, and the contrast is always made with the Malaikas. They execute tasks perfectly, but they lack that moral independence, that ability to adapt. If humanity were static, the active role of governance and moral correction, the very core of Khalifa, would be impossible. The moral struggle is the meaning. It's inherent in our developmental existence.
And what about the moment that capacity for moral choice is introduced? The sources point to chapter 15, verse 29, the Creator breathing into him from my energy. This is interpreted as the endowment of that essential spark.
The endowment of free will and moral consciousness, this is what elevates humanity above purely obedient physical forces.
And that phrasing is just. It's immensely profound.
It is, and it directly relates to our accountability. That consciousness, that spark of independent will, is what makes the human moral struggle significant. We talked about the Malaika's obedience as tasbih, diligent striving.
Right, but it's involuntary.
Their tasbih is involuntary. It's automatic. Humanity is challenged to achieve a conscious, ethical tasbih, a daily, deliberate choice to align our independent will with the larger cosmic and ethical divine law.
So our path of becoming, of development,
Yeah.
that's what makes our accountability meaningful. But how does that translate into this idea of superior worship? Doesn't that sound a little, anthropocentric?
That's a very fair challenge, and we have to be precise with the language. It's not an anthropocentric superiority based on some kind of inherent worth. It's a functional superiority based on potential.
Because a functional superiority.
The superiority lies in the quality of the obedience. So imagine a perfectly running machine. It executes its task flawlessly without deviation. That's the involuntary tasbih of the Malaikas.
I see.
Now imagine a being that could choose to dismantle that machine or just let it rust, but instead dedicates its energy every single day to ensuring the machine runs perfectly out of a conscious moral duty.
That's the quality of human ibadah.
That's the quality. The struggle defines the worth of the action.
That's a really profound distinction. Our moral struggle is that daily conscious choice to strive against the inertia of our lower nature.
Yes.
And to align with the cosmic order.
And that's a lifelong task.
Now, if we look at the actual test that was given to Adam, to mankind, to validate this high appointment, it wasn't a test of ritual strengths or physical might, was it?
No, not at all. It was purely a test of intellect, a test of knowledge.
And the central evidence for this is in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 31.
Yes, Allama Adam al-Azma. He endowed humankind with the capacity to attain knowledge. The capacity for azma, which is often translated as names or qualities, rationalists interpret it as the ability to discern, to categorize, to analyze, and to understand the functional reality of the universe.
So this intellectual capacity, not strength or even piety, is the prerequisite for supremacy on earth.
It's a qualifier. This capacity is the essential intellectual tool you would need to understand and implement the complex divine laws, the Sunnah Allah, that are required to govern Earth justly.
It's essentially bestowing scientific, logical, and adaptive potential upon humanity.
It connects right back to that definition of Khalifa as a delegated governor. I mean, if you are entrusted with maintaining the environmental and social balance, the mizan, you have to have the scientific capacity to decode the universe, to understand cause and effect, and to implement sustainable solutions.
So the role requires constant problem solving.
Constant problem solving, adaptation, and ethical governance, all based on accumulated wisdom. It's an active intellectual role.
And the Malaika's response in the next verse, 32, it confirms this distinction perfectly. We only know what you have taught us.
They humbly acknowledge their limited, programmed function. In this allegorical reading, they are the forces of nature that execute their assigned tasks perfectly. The laws of physics are inviolable after all, but they lack the intellectual independence to learn new things.
Or to adapt existing laws to create new, dynamic legal frameworks.
Which is exactly what you need in a mutable earthly environment. Their obedience is perfect, but it's static.
The validation, then, comes in verse 33, where humanity successfully demonstrates this capacity to learn and to apply that knowledge. And the Creator says, He knew the potentials that lie dormant within you.
That is such a powerful idea. It speaks to this vast, undeveloped moral and intellectual landscape that is inherent within every single human being, just waiting to be activated through guided effort, through education, through continuous inquiry.
It suggests our potential isn't fully realized at birth.
No, it's a project. It's a project we undertake throughout our entire lives.
This means our intellect, our akal, is a profound spiritual responsibility. It's not just a tool for deciphering the physical universe, it's the non-negotiable prerequisite for achieving justice through conscious moral choice.
That's it.
Without independent reasoning, the mandate of Khalifa to govern it would be literally impossible.
And that is the ultimate point of this section. Knowledge is the engine of our moral potential. If we fail to use our intellect to understand the consequences of our actions or the nature of the mizan, then we are fundamentally failing the very first test of our vicegerency.
So the mandate is established, the qualifications are met, but the journey immediately encounters opposition.
Immediately.
Once that authority is granted, we face this internal conflict described in verse 34, where the universal forces, the angels, are commanded to be subservient to Adam mankind.
Right, and this submission, the sajda, it's rationally understood as the physical and natural forces submitting to the intelligent control of the human mind.
Can you give an example?
Well, think about it. The laws of physics are absolute, but through science and knowledge, the very capacity mankind just demonstrated, we can harness those forces. We harness gravity to build bridges, we harness combustion to travel, we harness electricity to power cities.
So the universe is inherently harnessable by the rational human intellect.
Yes, but then you encounter the dissenter, Iblis, or Satan, who refused this submission because of self-glorification.
And our sources are extremely critical of interpreting Iblis as some kind of external supernatural creature.
That is the critical interpretive move here. The sources define Iblis allegorically. He is the rebellious state of the human self, the nafs.
The nafs, the ego.
The ego, the personality. This internal domain is necessary for us to have independent agency, but when it succumbs to pure self-interest, it rebels against the higher controls of judgment and divine moral values. The battle is internal. It's a civil war within the human psyche.
So the greatest obstacle to the Caliph's success in establishing justice externally is the internal refusal of the ego to submit to a rational moral authority.
It makes the test deeply, deeply intimate. The essence of this refusal is self-glorification, which, very quickly translates into a desire to escape personal responsibility.
And we see that articulated so vividly in chapter 7, verse 16. Iblis refuses to accept the blame.
Yes, he says, because you have put me in error, I will surely sit and wait for them on your straight path.
That is the perfect rationalization, isn't it? The failure isn't mine. It's the external system, or maybe even the creator's design, that caused me to make a mistake.
Exactly. And it perfectly captures that very human tendency to rationalize moral failure by blaming external forces, rather than acknowledging the deficiency of the self, of the nafs. This internal rebellion is the core conflict we have to overcome to fulfill the mandate.
What's fascinating here, and what the sources insist we look at, is how modern science, psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics, they seem to validate the very architecture of this internal moral struggle.
They really do.
This isn't just an ancient metaphor, it's a biological reality.
It is, and it brings immense weight to this concept of the nafs as the internal obstacle. To really understand this mapping, we need to introduce the secular concept of dual process theory.
Okay.
It's the idea that our brains operate using two distinct systems. You have the hot system and you have the cool system.
So let's map the theological conflict onto this biological framework.
Yeah.
Where does the ego fit in?
The rebellious ego, Iblis, or the nafs, it maps directly onto the limbic system. That's the hot system. This is the older, instinctual, purely emotional part of the brain.
Fast and automatic.
It is fast, it's automatic, and it demands instant gratification and immediate emotional reward, often without any regard for long-term consequences. This is the part of us that seeks the short-term gain, which aligns perfectly with Iblis's refusal to look beyond the immediate moment.
And the rational moral authority, the divine law, the ability to govern justly, that maps to the cool system.
Yes, that maps to the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC. The PFC is the pinnacle of human evolution. It's the center of our executive function.
So things like long-term planning, impulse control.
Rational decision-making, long-term planning, impulse control, and the calculation of future consequences. The entire mandate of Khalifa to implement Adl based on foresight is a purely PFC function.
And here's where the secular science perfectly describes the theological fallibility. Psychologists confirm that the failure to regulate that hot limbic system is the primary driver of, self-sabotage, addiction, poor ethical choices.
And this brings us to a concept called ego depletion. The sources highlight this idea that self-control is a finite resource. The PFC is a very energy-intensive system. Right. So when we are stressed or tired or overwhelmed, our willpower gets depleted, and we default to the powerful, fast, and demanding impulses of the limbic system. We default to the nafs.
And that state is the internal defeat of the Khalifa rule.
It's the moment of failure.
Can you give us a concrete, modern example of how this internal defeat could manifest as systemic facade?
Certainly. Think of a corporate leader or maybe a politician. They may rationally know that sustainable long-term practices, investing in green technology, for example, or ensuring economic equity for workers are the moral and ultimately the most profitable path. That's the ADL.
That's the PFC talk.
And that's the PFC. However, they're faced with quarterly pressures, exhaustion, overwhelming political stress, and the hot system kicks in. The NAFs demand immediate relief and maximum resource control now.
So they make a snap decision.
They make a snap, unethical decision. Dumping toxic waste, committing corporate fraud, cutting essential social services. Because the rational PFC is depleted. And the impulsive limbic system, the Iblis within, it whispers, take the immediate profit. You can blame the system later.
Which is why the marshmallow test is so famous in behavioral science. It illustrates that exact struggle.
It's the perfect illustration. The ability to suppress the immediate desire of the NAFs for a greater delayed reward, which is the divine law's ultimate promise of a just society and eternal reward. That ability is the single best predictor of success, both personally and ethically.
And behavioral economics even has a name for this. Hyperbolic discounting.
Or present bias, yes. It describes our overwhelming and frankly irrational preference for a smaller immediate reward over a larger delayed one. The failure isn't lack of knowledge, it's the failure of the energy-intensive PFC to override the immediate biological demand of the limbic core.
So the theological struggle is perfectly mirrored by a biological imperative. The struggle between the NAFs and the law is a competition between a powerful older, deeply wired system and a slower, energy-intensive, newer system.
A system that requires constant, conscious effort to maintain its authority.
This reframes spiritual growth completely.
It does. Spiritual development becomes the scientifically sound process of deliberately empowering the rational prefrontal cortex to override and govern the raw power of the older, impulsive limbic core. The secular world confirms it. Internal failure to self-regulate is the root cause of external systemic failure.
The instruction to govern the self is the prerequisite for governing the earth.
You have to win the internal battle first.
So the failure of this self-governance, the victory of Iblis, it leads immediately to external societal consequences. And we see this in the allegorical story of the fall in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 35.
Yes. The sources interpret this allegory as the shift from an ideal state of communal harmony to one of socio-economic contention. The garden. It's read not as a literal location, but as jhana, the ideal state of communal harmony and abundance, a paradise on earth.
A society where needs are easily met, where there's no struggle for resources.
Exactly. And the warning concerns the branching tree. This is interpreted as the prohibition against divisive self-interest.
So selfishness and rivalry.
Selfishness and rivalry. The command is essentially, do not allow self-interest to divide your community or you will become oppressors, or zalimin.
And violation of this core social law instantly leads to zulm, wrongdoing or oppression.
And again, zulm is not just subjective evil, it's explicitly defined as displacing the Creator's established social balance and the violation of human rights. The first and most critical social law for mankind is communal unity and justice. The moment self-interest overrides community harmony, zulm is born.
The consequences are immediate and systemic. Verse 36 says, Satan caused them both to stumble therein and got them out of the happy state they were in. And so we said, degraded you have become with wedges of discord among yourselves.
That detail is so powerful. Wedges of discord. The moral failure instantly manifests socioeconomically. The clash of unchecked selfish desires creates rivalry, contention, and strife. The systemic breakdown is, at its core, an economic fall.
From what to what?
From a state of shared abundance to a new reality of hoarding, scarcity, intense private ownership that excludes others, and continuous turmoil.
So the fall isn't some mystical event in the past. It's a human-initiated, self-inflicted wound resulting from an ethical breakdown.
It is. The Malaika's original concern about facade corruption and bloodshed, it was tragically justified because humans chose the path of division, rivalry, and selfishness.
And we have to highlight the source's interpretation regarding the gender parity here.
Yes, that's very important. The Quran uses the phrase Adam and his wife and deliberately omits the specific name Eve or Hawa that you see in other traditions.
Why is that significant?
The goal is to strip the event of gendered blame. The term Adam itself, in this context, comes from udma, which means the ability to live together as a community. It underscores that the moral failing and the subsequent accountability were universal human failures, shared equally by all of mankind, regardless of gender.
That focus shifts the entire weight of the narrative. It's not about a specific historical event with two people.
No.
It's a timeless principle. When we choose self-glorification over the communal good, we fall from a state of harmony into a state of strife.
Every time.
Every single time. It's a repeating pattern.
The error was profound and systemic. It seems it was beyond human self-correction alone. This necessitates divine guidance, which brings us to the solution: tauba, or repentance.
And tauba is often misunderstood as merely, saying you're sorry or feeling regret.
Right.
But our sources define it much more robustly. It's an active, rational, and systemic process. It means realizing one's fault and taking corrective action.
Corrective action, that's the key. It's crucial, and this corrective action has to be a genuine effort, both personally and societally, to reverse the harm that was caused by the initial deviation.
So let's make that concrete. If the sin was systemic facade, say, creating an exploitative economic system, then tauba demands the systemic action of dismantling that system.
Yes, and implementing restorative justice.
So it's not enough to simply regret exploiting others. You have to actively redistribute the ill-gotten gains and establish a new, just structure.
That's the key distinction. Tauba is a systematic return to the correct path, the divine law, which allows the individual and the community to participate once again in the collective mandate of Khalifa. It's a mechanism for recalibration and correction, not just absolution.
And the promise of salvation through this guidance. It's collective, too. The sources note the use of the multiple plural all of you in verse 38.
It is collective. And the resulting piece is holistic. It's described as freedom from khawf, which is fear from without external threats, societal chaos, and freedom from huzn, which is intrinsic depression or grief from within, internal anxiety and regret.
That is a deeply pragmatic outcome, isn't it?
It is. Divine guidance provides a comprehensive code that stabilizes both the external world justice, countering chaos, and the internal world moral certainty, countering anxiety. The promised guidance directly counters the toil, turmoil, and strife that resulted from the moral deviation. It shows the real-world utility of the revealed law as a social contract.
The moral contract is reestablished. The collective task of Khalifa resumes. Now we have to examine the practical blueprint for implementation. The divine system, or deen. If the authority is delegated and conditional, what are the non-negotiable pillars of a society governed by a vicegerent?
This is the practical core of the entire mandate. Since ultimate sovereignty, Hakimiyya, rests solely with the Creator, human authority is merely representative.
The Khalifa implements the Creator's will.
Not human-made laws that contradict the spirit of justice and balance. So we have to examine the 4 fundamental pillars detailed in our sources, starting with the highest mandate of all, absolute justice, or adl.
And Surah An-Nisa, verse 135, sets an impossibly high standard for adl. What does it demand of the Khalifa?
It demands absolute, rational objectivity in judgment, an objectivity that is completely independent of self-interest, class, or kinship. The verse commands, stand up firmly for justice, witnesses for God, even if it is against yourselves, your parents, and your relatives, and whether the case is of a rich person or a poor person.
That is revolutionary.
It is. It's the foundational ethical premise of any viable society. If the system fails to apply law equally to the wealthy and the poor, or if personal loyalty outweighs legal integrity, the entire structure of the Khalifa collapses. This standard explicitly demolishes the tribal, familial, and class loyalties that underpin most historical forms of governance.
And the ability to administer justice against your own immediate family or your own financial interest, that demands an internal moral fortitude.
A mastered nous.
It connects right back to our discussion on the PFC and the Limbic System.
It's the ultimate test of the PFC overriding the Limbic System's demand for tribal safety and immediate self-preservation. Societal survival, according to these sources, depends entirely on this unwavering legal integrity.
Okay, moving on. The second pillar is maintaining the balance, or mizan. This connects the physical cosmos directly to moral law. How does the Khalifa ensure mizan?
Mizan is this fixed equilibrium of natural laws. It's the principle that everything exists in a finely tuned state of balance. The mandate requires the Khalifa to engage in proactive, sustainable resource management and equitable social distribution.
There's a specific verse for this.
Yes, in Surah Ar-Rahman, chapters 55, verses 7 through 9, the Creator commands, observe the balance with equity and do not reduce the balanced justice in the least. This means economic and environmental systems are inseparable.
So violating the Mizan is the root of environmental facade, climate destruction, resource depletion, pollution, and it's also the root of social facade.
Like resource wars and economic stratification.
So they're not separate problems. They are failures of the Khalifa mandate to maintain equilibrium.
Precisely. If one group consumes resources disproportionately and pollutes without consequence, the global mizan is reduced. That will inevitably lead to suffering for another group. Therefore, environmental stewardship and economic fairness, they are fundamental acts of worship. They are non-negotiable duties of the vicegerent.
That brings us to Pillar 3, which focuses specifically on economic justice. Qidhi, or equity. And this is detailed vividly in Surah Al-Hashr 59.7, specifically addressing wealth distribution.
And this is perhaps the most explicit instruction countering the historical tendency toward empire and aristocracy. The purpose of the system of wealth distribution, so taxes, resource management, public expenditure, is explicitly laid out.
What is that purpose?
To prevent wealth concentration. The verse states that wealth distribution is designed in order that it may not circulate only among the rich of you. This is not a suggestion, it is a structural command.
Okay, so that implies that if a government or an economic system is designed in such a way that wealth naturally and inevitably aggregates at the top, leading to extreme inequality,
then that system is fundamentally violating the blueprint of the Khalifa mandate.
it means the system must actively, structurally, and continuously counter hoarding and exploitation.
Yes. Modern examples of failure here would be things like unchecked financial speculation, tax systems that favor concentrated capital over labor, and the rise of monopolies. The divine law mandates that the economic governance implemented by the Khalifa must treat the flow of money as a vital resource necessary for the entire community's health,
Not as a tool for economic aggression.
or the perpetual enrichment of an elite few. The integrity of the Khalifa is measured by the well-being of its most economically vulnerable members.
In the final pillar, active work, or amal. The role is dynamic, not passive contemplation.
Right. Surah At-Tawbah 9.105 provides the direct, assertive command for continuous action.
Right.
Work, for Allah will observe your work, and so will his messenger and the believers.
So ethical work is a form of worship.
Ethical work in science, in medicine, in education, in economics, in establishing justice, it's all elevated to the level of worship, of ibadah. The Creator asks for tangible output and continuous effort, proving that faith is not merely a set of rituals, but a comprehensive social and economic system based on productive, ethical engagement with the world.
The integration of all of these elements, justice, balance, equity, and work, it really proves that Deen is a holistic, comprehensive, socioeconomic, and moral order.
And fulfilling the Khalifa role, applying reason and moral discernment, the alil, to establish adl and mizan, that is the actualization of humanity being created in the best of stature, as it says in chapter 95. Our potential is unlocked through righteous governance, both of the self and of the society.
This ideal it's breathtaking in its scope and its rigor. But now, as our sources insist, we have to confront the historical reality. The transformation of this ethical ideal into the political caliphate was, by many measures, a historical catastrophe.
It was.
And often constituted the greatest deviation from the original Quranic concept.
The contrast is truly tragic. The Quranic ideal we just detailed was non-monarchical. It was based on merit and community consent, or shura, and it was absolutely focused on law-based justice, alil. The ruler was supposed to be the first servant of the law, accountable to the community.
And the historical caliphate became something very different, very quickly.
Very different.
So let's detail the first and most decisive break, the shift to monarchy, which began almost immediately after the era of the first four caliphs.
The transition under the Umayyad dynasty was the critical pivot point. The decisive break was the introduction of hereditary succession. The position was passed from father to son,
which treated this divinely delegated leadership position, a trust based on intellectual and moral merit, as just dynastic property.
It became family property. So if the position is hereditary, the ruler no longer has to be the community's most capable, most rational, or most pious agent. The meritocratic basis of the Khalifa role is instantly destroyed.
And the focus shifts entirely.
From serving the divine law to securing the dynasty, managing family rivalries, and accumulating wealth. The fundamental principle that the ruler is accountable to the law and the community's judgment, the shura, was replaced by the divine right of kings, which has absolutely no foundation in the original concept.
And deviation 2 followed quickly. The assertion of the absolute sovereignty of the ruler.
As the Islamic Empire grew, the Caliphate began adopting the imperial practices of the conquered Byzantine and Persian empires. The sources detail how the caliph just ceased being an accessible figure, sitting on a simple pulpit, engaging in communal consultation.
He became secluded.
Secluded, surrounded by pomp, elaborate ceremony, vast wealth, and rigid court etiquette. The title of Khalifa was fused with the power and the trappings of an emperor, a Caesar, or a Khosrow. This physical distance and ostentatious display immediately contradicted the core ethical ideal of humility and accountability that's inherent in trusteeship.
And this corrupted the legal foundation.
It had to. When the ruler is perceived as absolutely sovereign, the law begins to serve the ruler rather than the ruler serving the law. Jurists were often pressured to issue fatwas or rulings that sanctioned the caliph's actions, even when those actions contradicted the non-negotiable pillars of adl and qi.
So the delegated authority became absolute human sovereignty.
Leading directly to the facade the Malaikas warned about from the very beginning.
And the third, and perhaps the most tragic, deviation. The reduction of deen itself.
Once the political structure became a hereditary, exploitative monarchy, a non-Quranic state, that state lost all credibility as an implementer of the comprehensive system of life.
So the spiritual retreat became a defense mechanism.
A necessary defense mechanism. To cope with unjust tyrannical governance, the general population and many scholars began to decouple political and socio-economic justice adl from their faith.
So they focused intensely on personal, internalized ritualism.
Prayer, fasting, private charity.
As a complete definition of deen.
Exactly, effectively abandoning the political and communal mandate of Khalifa to challenge injustice.
And this reduction was a survival strategy.
It was, but it resulted in profound intellectual stagnation regarding governance. It made faith safe to practice under tyranny, but it also cemented the failure to establish justice. The tragic outcome is that history proved the Malaika's warning tragically accurate. The political caliphate often reproduced the very facade, the oppression, the injustice, the self-glorification of the Iblis principle that the Quranic ideal was designed to prevent.
When the ego is given unchecked political power, the historical failure shows it inevitably substitutes worldly ambition for divine guidance. That delegated authority becomes a tool of oppression.
It is the ultimate human cautionary tale regarding the corruption of power.
But I have to ask, if the mandate of Khalifah is so clear and the initial leaders were closer to the source material, why did they fall victim to these deviations so quickly? What does that tell us about human nature?
Well, it tells us the internal struggle is relentlessly powerful. We discussed hyperbolic discounting earlier. The shift from a principled leadership, the first four caliphs, to a dynastic monarchy with the Umayyads. It happened because the leaders, or the influential figures around them, prioritized the immediate gain of stability and dynastic power.
The small, immediate reward.
The small, immediate reward over the long-term, arduous necessity of meritocratic, consensus-based governance, or shura. Human preference for immediate, easy answers. The victory of the limbic system is what undermined the ideal, even when the truth was staring them in the face.
The failure of the institution was a consequence of individual moral weakness.
On a massive scale.
That brings us to our synthesis. The failure of the institution does not negate the universal mandate resting on every single individual. Khalifa is a recognition of human dignity, resting on our unique capacity for knowledge asthma and free will.
And our success hinges entirely on the continuous conscious alignment of the powerful impulse-driven nafs with the demands of rational moral law.
And that continuous alignment is the definition of a life lived purposefully.
It is. This choice between submission to reason and rebellion through the ego is the rational basis of accountability. As stated in chapter 18, verse 29, whoever wills, let him believe, and whoever wills, let him disbelieve. The consequence of rejecting the foundational laws isn't arbitrary punishment. It's the logical, self-willed outcome of choosing zulm, of choosing systemic corruption.
The historical caliphate demonstrated that even the most ambitious external justice systems collapse when the internal system of self-regulation fails. The political structure failed because the internal individual struggle, the battle against Iblis, was lost on a massive scale.
So we return to the intimate question. For you, the listener, reflecting on that historical failure, if the grandest political structures, built on a foundation of divine law, failed because individuals prioritized the short-term demands of the ego, the immediate gratification of the limbic system,
Over the long-term morality of the prefrontal cortex.
then where do you see that internal battle playing out in your own life today?
The mandate of Khalifa is ultimately a personal one then. The ultimate measure of the vicegerent is not in ruling others, but in the successful, continuous, and rational governance of the self.
So what does it mean to achieve edel justice internally? To master the rebellious nafs, to ensure internal balance or mizan, and to govern your choices with reason. Before you ever attempt to establish justice externally in your community, your workplace, or the larger world, that really is the question that defines the true nature of trusteeship.